Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the Nordic Convention on International Affairs 2020. I hope you can hear me and that I'm not having the usual trouble at every Zoom meeting that you start out as being muted. So the second day of the Nordic Convention of 2020 is what we're doing today, and we're starting up with a keynote session where we will hear a speech from the President of the Nordic Youth Council, Nicholas Kujala. Before I give the floor to Nicholas, I will just briefly introduce the Nordic Convention 2020 for those of you who were not able to attend yesterday. The Nordic Convention is a collaboration project between associations on international affairs from the Nordic countries and Estonia. Organizers of this event are the Finnish Association of International Affairs, the Rahvusvahelisten suhteiden ring association from Tartu, Estonia, so a Society of International Relations from there. International Debate from Copenhagen University, the Danish Foreign Policy Society, Youth Wing, and also the Swedish Association of International Affairs with its member associations. The event was originally supposed to be held physically in Copenhagen in April this year, but due to the COVID pandemic, we were not able to do it that way. Instead, we have moved the event to September and made it virtual, and that is the event that we are having right now at the moment. And with that, I will introduce now the speaker of today, Nicholas Kujala. You are the president of the Nordic Youth Council, as I already mentioned. You are also in many other ways active on the international, European, and global sphere in many different things, and probably you will also mention that yourself in your speech. So you will be addressing now all Nordic young people who are interested in foreign affairs and international politics from the perspective of your position as president of the Nordic Youth Council. So the floor is yours, Nicholas.
All right, thank you so much, Sak, and it's a really big pleasure to be here today, this sunny Sunday morning here in Finland. At least it's nice and sunny after a stormy week. Let me begin with a short story. Back when I was a young child, my parents used to take me to what is called the Nordic Winter Day here in southern Finland, in Espoo, right next to Helsinki. And the Nordic Winter Day was a nice concept where we could participate in different Nordic activities, basically anything from riding Icelandic horses to participating in traditional Danish party events or these children's party events, and learn to paint in different from the countries. This was my first real way to experience the Nordic traditions and Nordic ways in the different countries, and it was a nice experience when I was younger. I particularly remember us curling on the ocean ice, and I feel really old when I say this, but we haven't seen ice on this part of the ocean anymore in many years. And this is not even 20 years ago when we would actually go on the ice on the sea and do curling. So there's a lot of things that you can remember from only about 20 years ago that maybe aren't possible anymore today. I was invited to speak with a topic, a greeting to young Nordic citizens interested in foreign policy, and that is what I will do. But first, I'll introduce myself shortly. I'm Nicholas Kujala, current president of the Nordic Youth Council, or Ungdomens Nordiska Råd, as we call it in Scandinavian. The Nordic Youth Council is a representative organ of more than 40 political youth organizations in the Nordics. We're represented from all political ideologies and all the Nordic countries, but also the Nordic autonomous territoriums of Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Åland Islands. So this makes us a really broad group of young people trying to make the Nordic region better, but also a little bit on a broader spectrum, the world a little bit better today's. I will be approaching this topic that I just mentioned from three quite specific directions. I hope I'll have time to look at all these three aspects, because it's a pretty broad topic. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to international affairs. First of all, I will address a little bit about the state of the Nordic politics and the Nordic cooperation, because this is a really interesting topic currently. Had I had this speech half a year ago in Copenhagen, my approach would be very different to this speech. The situation in the Nordic countries has changed so much in the last half year due to the coronavirus, but we'll get to that in a minute. But it's an interesting topic to look at. Secondly, we'll discuss a little bit about how to get involved as young people in international affairs overall, but also how to get your political ideas on the table where these decisions are made, because it's possible even as individuals to get your ideas out there, but also through working with various different organizations, depending a little bit on what you want to work with. And finally, we'll look a little bit about at the bigger picture, cooperation outside the Nordics also, maybe the Baltics a little bit, EU a little bit, Europe a little bit. I won't be going too much into the global politics of the United Nations. I think I need another half hour, 2 hours for that. But we'll look at a little bit about what's going on outside of the Nordics also, and between the EU and the Nordics, for example. And if we would have time, which I'm not sure we will, I would also like to discuss a little bit about the Arctic relations, because that's also a big topic for this year, year as president for the Nordic Youth Council. But anyways, themes, I'll just shortly dive deeper into who I am in this introduction. I'm 25 years old. I'm a natural sciences student here in Helsinki. I've been studying now for 3 years, geology and meteorology, which means that climate questions, but also resource questions, energy production are all very interesting for me. Biodiversity also to some extent. This is what I've been studying, but it's also a big part of the political activism I've been working on for more than 10 years, besides education policy, which I started off with back in the days. And one of the big questions that I usually get is, why am I doing this? This is a pretty common question for anybody who's doing international politics or international affairs. Why are you doing this? Why do you go to the airport at 4 in the morning? Well, used to go to the airport at 4 in the morning to take the first flight out somewhere for a 1-hour meeting to just return back home in the afternoon. And the simple question is that I want to make the world a better place. And I think putting yourself out on the line is one to do so. It's just connecting on the Zoom and having a meeting with your counterparts around the world. And I really wish that this would become more of a custom for at least the shorter meetings, even though it's a wonderful thing to meet everybody in person. And I do hope that we can go back to that, where we can meet each other in person and to actually network that way, because we're losing a lot of that side. But I do not miss too much flying around the globe. I spent almost every single day until March abroad this year, and it feels quite nice to actually be home for a longer time. But not to go too much on a sidetrack about myself, we'll go look at the state of the Nordic politics currently. As I said, the state of the Nordic politics is very interesting currently. The coronavirus has become a huge roadblock basically for how the Nordic cooperation is going forward. Only last year, the Nordic prime ministers presented their vision of a integrated Nordic, the most integrated area in the world, not only by opening the borders, but being sustainable and building on that sustainability to become a big global actor. This was supposed to be done until 2030, but unfortunately, I don't see that we've been doing a lot of progress this past half year. We all know that the Nordic countries have had different approaches to the coronavirus. I won't be saying which country has been doing right or wrong. This is one of the most common questions I actually get nowadays from journalists around the Nordic countries. What do I think about Sweden's approach, living in Finland? And all I can say is I'm quite happy that we actually have an open border between Finland and Sweden again after half a year. Border was opened yesterday or the day before. So in that sense, I think we're moving back to the normal. But it is devastating to see that such a big problem that came towards our society, we could not tackle it together. And I understand the situation deteriorated quickly in different parts of the Nordic countries in different state or different time, but still I'm a little amazed that both the Nordic Council of Ministers and a lot of other Nordic actors think that we have done a great job with the Nordic cooperation. And I have to disagree on that, because you can see the frustration in the politicians in the Nordic Council, for example, wanting to meet the Nordic prime ministers. We just had a meeting a couple of days ago with a statement about that. But you can see that frustration that there's not enough. We haven't done enough to make sure that people who live in border regions, for example, could travel across the border to meet their family or to go to work. And this is a big issue, for example, in the Skåne area, in Malmö and Copenhagen. This is especially a big issue on the Norwegian-Swedish border and also on the Finnish-Swedish border up in Lapland. These are regions that really require each other and not looking at the border of a country anymore, and hasn't been like that for many decades. So when we start closing borders, it's a really serious issue. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to say if we did the right or wrong thing, but I do think that this has a big and a long-lasting impact on how the Nordic politics are working. Not only about Corona, Nordic politics and affairs are moving forward in other ways. Basically, we haven't had as much time and the possibilities to actually work on policy. Corona has taken all the times of our parliamentarians, for example. For me, as president of the Nordic Youth Council, I actually work with the Nordic Council Presidium, which is the leading body of the Nordic Council. It's consists of 15 parliamentarians from around the Nordic region. Some of the leading parliamentarians actually from each of the parliaments. So it's a group of people who have a lot of power, but also a very little time. And then this means, of course, that when their time is consumed in their national politics, it leaves a little bit less time for the Nordic cooperation. Things that we've been moving forward, for example, this year, night trains from Sweden and Denmark to Europe. We wish that there would be more night trains from all of the countries, but it's still hard to get that infrastructure to function. Night train from Helsinki to Berlin or Brussels would be really nice, but we're decades away from that. Also, Norway is a little tricky with that, but we're working on that hard. Other things are energy cooperation, for example. We want to see a lot more of that. And then more social policies, climate policies. These are the things that our active council members are working on to make sure that the Nordic Council hears us, the politicians hears us in our voice. We adopted about 20 resolutions at our annual session last year, and in that sense, there's a lot of things that we want to change in the Nordic region. And I think we're kind of on a break right now, but once the coronavirus hopefully dies down a little bit, we'll be actually have the possibility to go back to work on this. But as long as the Nordic affairs and the Nordic cooperation is in a stagnation point where we don't really know what is the next step, our work in the Nordic Youth Council and policy making is also very difficult. And it's just really important to have that in mind when we start talking about cooperation, because the Nordic cooperation, not only in our scale, but also on a global scale and a European scale, is unique almost for its region. The Benelux region, for example, is a good example of where the cooperation also functions quite well. And that's also a place where we have a lot of cooperation, also with the Council of Baltic Sea States, for example, and these different groupings of countries that come together. But still, the Nordic Council and the Nordic cooperation is one of the strongest globally. And in that sense, seeing that stuff isn't working out very well here, I'm a little worried that stuff isn't working cooperation-wise elsewhere either. And it's a fact that closed borders makes it much harder to live a global life. Even though we have these different internet platforms, it just does not work in the same way for networking and all of that work besides the official meeting. Maybe if we move on a little bit from what the state of the Nordics are, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Also, if you have any questions on how we're functioning in the Nordics currently, or what my views on the future are. I haven't done a lot of speculating, which I could be doing, but I don't really see that as the main point right now. Main point is to move forward in the cooperation. But moving a little bit more on to how I got involved. Back in the days, as I mentioned in my introduction, I got interested in international politics or international affairs when I was pretty young. It wasn't through the politics, actually. It was through the traditions, seeing that we have a lot of similarities in the Nordic countries and a lot of things that we could learn from each other. And once I grew up a little more, I actually I started to learn more about the politics, about the open borders, the Helsinki Treaty, which is the treaty that defines everything of the Nordic cooperation. And through that, I just grew an interest into international politics. Besides my international background, having an American father, it's having grown up in that international environment is what drove me to come over here. but a question on how to get involved overall. And this is not only for participants here, but overall for everybody who is interested to hear how to get involved into into Nordic politics or international affairs, for example. It's just to find that thing that you like to do, and then try to see if there is a Nordic organization for that, because Nordic organizations are literally everywhere, not only in politics. Politics is maybe the best way to affect policy and affect the laws and stuff like that. And UNR, Nordic Youth Council, is absolutely one of the best places for that, in my opinion. I have to say it also because I'm the president. So I've been mentioning the Nordic Youth Council several times during this upcoming 15 minutes or so. But there's organizations around every single sector for Nordic cooperation. Sports is one big example. There are sports tournaments in the Nordics for Nordic citizens all around. If you're interested into working with these kind of tournaments, for example, there's an opportunity. Scouting is a good example. There's a lot of Nordic cooperation within the scouting movement. All of these different organizations, these different movements have their Nordic organizations also. And it's, in my opinion, not the most difficult thing to join them. So it doesn't have to be political. If you want to be politically active on an international level, you have basically two ways to go. Either the party political youth organization that you feel affiliated to the most, that's one way. This works both in Nordic cooperation, but it also works on an EU and a global level, because most political organizations actually do have their own umbrella organizations on these levels. And depending on country and organization, it's varies on how difficult it is to actually become active on these levels. But from my experience, for example, in Finland, it requires some work, first on a local level, regional level, national level, but after that, getting to the international level is a fairly nice experience. Then there's the other way, which is through the civil society activism overall. I started my international career basically in politics through a student organization. My secondary school student union was part of the organizing bureau of European School Student Unions, which is a big European organization with more than 20 members from different countries in Europe, working towards a goal of better education in Europe. And I was actually active there for some time, and this is the basic way of how I got into international affairs. So not even through party politics, but just through an international non-governmental youth organization that was completely non-political, in that sense that everybody was welcome no matter what the political stance was. And we had that one common goal of better education in Europe. And that's probably the more simple way, because usually if you're active in an organization, you also have that passion that drives you to work with those things. And even better, to work with people around Europe who also share that passion, or around Nordics, or even on a global level. Just find those people that have that passion and work with them. And that's one way to get involved. And I just, it takes some work, as I said. Back in the days, it used to take a lot of traveling also. If you wanted to get more known in the organization, you'd had to travel to Brussels or travel to Berlin or to Rome to meet these people. But nowadays, there are a lot of events that are pretty low, with a low threshold to participate online. And I just have to recommend to just hop into one of these events sometimes if you have the opportunity to check out what these organizations work with. There's so many events. I know from my experience that there's so many events that I want to participate, but I only have 24 hours on the clock, which means that there's so many opportunities to check out. And I'm quite convinced that there's something for everybody out there. And in that sense, getting involved should be it's really a rewarding experience, actually. And since you are here this Sunday morning, I'm going to make a pretty harsh assumption that you are in some way interested in being involved in international affairs, or interested in how international affairs works. And that's a pretty good way. A lot of my friends who don't have any kind of interest into organizational work or politics or international affairs would say, why weren't you out drinking last night and have hangover on Sunday mornings? And it's just, this is much more rewarding for me personally. I see this is a rewarding place to be, and a nice thing to do with my life. Just shortly before we move on to the topic of Nordic cooperation outside the Nordic area, a little bit about how to get your proposals out there for politicians to look at, to debate. one very simple way is to become active in your political youth organization and find a way to become active in UNR, the Nordic Youth Council. We have a pretty broad opportunity to accept resolutions in different themes. They can be anything from labor market to climate to transportation to energy production to more cultural things, languages, education. Everything is open for us. And depending on organization, it might be pretty easy to actually get up as a part of the UNR delegation from your own political youth organization. Political youth organizations isn't for everybody. Not everybody feels affiliated, but if you do, this is one great way of affecting policies. Because for us, once we have adopted a resolution after a nice debate, we actually work hard to get these resolutions to the Nordic Council. And once the Nordic Council adopts one of our resolutions as their own, it will actually become law someday. This is how the Nordic Council functions, basically, because once the Nordic Council has adopted a resolution, it goes on to what is called the Nordic Council of Ministers. There's a lot of different bodies in the Nordic cooperation. I could show a map here, but it's so complicated that it would take me half an hour to go through that. But the Nordic Council of Ministers basically is all the ministers from different countries grouped into their own fields of politics. And their job is to basically move forward the Nordic Council resolutions to become legislation in all Nordic countries. There are several examples of what has been adopted and worked on. These are pretty basic things that affects a very small portion of people, but there are also big things that are being worked on. For example, to get these night trains. We don't even need national legislation for that. We just need that willpower from the Nordic Council to say that, hey, this is what the Nordic countries want, the politicians want. How can we find a solution where Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark basically find a way to get these night trains to function through different ways? And why not Iceland too? But that requires an airplane in between. And in that sense, the Nordic Youth Council is an excellent way to bring your political or other proposals forward in a Nordic context. If you go to the EU context, there's a lot of different ways. Forum is a big umbrella organization that or is organized through over 120 member organizations. This is again throughout all the different sectors: culture, exchange, party political youth organizations, national youth councils. So LUF in Iceland, Alliance in Finland, DUF in Denmark, LSU in Sweden, and LNU in Norway, and ENL in Estonia are also organized there. And through these national youth councils, you can actually affect European politics quite nicely, because the European Youth Forum has a lot of power, a lot of opportunities, and a lot of ways to work. So basically, just being active in civil society will hopefully give you the reward to get your ideas forward all the way if it requires to legislation. And there's a lot of examples of young people who have gotten there very way up to the top level. And I'd love to talk about those more, but I know that we will be running out of time quite shortly. So I'll just move on shortly to address what happens outside of the Nordic region. Maybe first the Baltic cooperation, which I wish that there would be more of. Between the Nordics and the Baltics. For our part in the Nordic Youth Council, there's not that much. We've been working hard with the Baltic countries to establish similar kind of body for young politicians in the Baltic countries to have an opportunity to meet with the Baltic parliamentarians in order to actually drive the Baltic region much more forward in the youth way, where the young people get a say much stronger. And this is something we've been working on very many years, but unfortunately we still have these barriers in front of us where the politicians are really excited, but at the same time the adult politicians want to make sure that the agenda is set by them and not by the young people. This has to truly work from the young people up, basically us organizing how we work, what the policies are that we want, but also that we set the limits for what is okay and what is not. In the Nordic context, we've been working on this for decades already, and it started off from that youth engagement, the interest of young political activists, political youth organizations that wanted to join together. There were some umbrella organizations who actually then went on and formed this together with the Nordic Council, and in that sense, we have that official official position in the Nordic cooperation, but we don't really see that in the Baltics yet, which is unfortunate and sad, because we'd like to see this in all regions, especially in Europe, but also around the world, because it's a very functioning concept where young people are given actual say. We were given a seat or two at the tables where the decisions are made on an international level, which is quite rare. But when it comes to European affairs, it gets even more complicated than this, because EU is a difficult word to mention in Nordic cooperation, and this is basically because three out of the 5 countries are members, but 2 aren't in the EU. But even though we have members in the Nordic Council and Nordic cooperation who are members of the EU, we still have a lot of politicians saying that we shouldn't be doing our cooperation in the EU level, but instead just focus on the Nordic here and let the individual countries do their individual things in EU. Back in the days, there was a much stronger way of working with EU affairs, also for the youth, as the parliamentarians used to have much stronger cooperation within the Nordic in the EU. This was a very unofficial way of cooperating, but that's fairly much gone right now. There's no Nordic guidance on how to do this. However, that means also that the Nordic Youth Council has very limited ways of, for example, affecting the Nordic EU policies. Nordic Council doesn't really want to debate these issues overall. It feels like that's not a priority right now, which is really sad, because what the EU needs is strong Nordic cooperation also, because other countries are also cooperating. So instead of having these weird makeups of few countries here and there in negotiations, the Nordic countries could be one pretty strong team there to make sure that we have our joint goals. Because again, the past summer, when the negotiations about the EU, the salvation package for the coronavirus, there was no Nordic cooperation, and that's pretty sad. But when it comes to youth, as I mentioned, the European Youth Forum is probably the best place to do that. There we actually do have this Nordic-Baltic cooperation. It's an unofficial way of organizing, but it is one of the strongest blocks, I would say, in the Nordic or in the European Youth Forum. Here, the cooperation is very natural between the national youth councils of the Baltics, so Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and the Nordics, so the 5 countries here. And in that sense, we found ways to work over the Nordic region, but it's still hard to find the exact forms of cooperation, for example, in the Baltics for the young people there, because the most important part is to make sure that young people are the ones who have the power and who have the ways to move forward with their ideas. And just to conclude a little bit what I've been talking about, because it's a broad topic, I've been a little bit here and there, and at the same time, I think there's opportunities for everybody, and these need to be viewed from a broad way. The most important thing to remember in international affairs is to be patient. This is something I've learned. I'm still not used to it, but things take a long time to get through, for example, from an idea to legislation in not only in the EU, but also in the Nordics. This is a very general political rule overall. Things happen in slow motion in international affairs, and this happens pretty much everywhere. If you want something from that grassroots level to become something big, it takes some time. And in that sense, when I started when I was 14 in my local youth council and also in my political youth organization in Finland, there are still things that we put forward when I was much younger and still being debated. It's really frustrating, but at the same time, I do hope that the next generation of young politicians actually still continue that debate to make sure that one day these ideas that were formed in the beginning of the 2000, around 2010 or so, that these ideas would actually become legislation someday. So basically, be patient, be active, find your own way. There's not only one way. It doesn't have to be party politics. For us, it is. But in that sense, everybody has their way, and I hope that everybody also who's interested in international affairs finds that. And I see that we have a question here. I'd be happy to address that question. How do you find the role of civil society forums like the NCIA in boosting Nordic cooperation at large? It's a very simple answer. It's huge. Civil society organizations on a Nordic level are quite difficult position right now, especially one thing is funding, and that's something we've addressed a lot. But seeing different organizations cooperate in the civil society in the Nordic cooperations makes it much stronger. It's not only about the politicians, but it's about accountability. For example, we can't say that we represent all Nordic young people because we represent the political structures of the Nordic countries. So, for example, for the Nordic Youth Council in Nordic cooperation, we also need those organizations to boost our work, but also to make sure that these organizations within their own expert fields have a position in the Nordic cooperation. And what's so nice with Nordic cooperation in the Nordic area is that there's such a big freedom for the civil society. There's pretty much no other place in the world where freedom for civil society is this strong for these forums to work. And I think that's a big plus thing for us. It's a really good thing for us. And it is a big boost for how we can work and how we can engage more and more people. And that's the most important part, to engage as many people as possible in different forums, because that gives accountability, it gives legitimacy, and it gives many more people the pleasure to work with international affairs.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for this really exciting keynote speech of the Nordic Convention 2020. And I'm really happy that you also had time to address this question at the very end about the role of the Nordic Convention and civil society in our region more at large. I'm also very happy that you touched upon the topic of Nordic and Baltic regional cooperation, since our next and concluding session of the Nordic Convention on International Affairs 2020 will be about Nordic Baltic youth in climate politics, when we will meet Nordic and Baltic young people active in the climate scene in this panel, exchanging their different views and ideas. So I hope to see everyone here at this panel, both Nicholas and everyone in the audience, also in the audience for that panel. It's going to be really exciting. And with that, I will just thank you for attending the keynote session. Thank you again very much, Nicholas, for this very nice insights. And see you at 1:15 Swedish, so CEST time, for the climate panel in Finnish and Estonian time, Eastern European time zone. It is 2:15. So remember to tune in to the final concluding session of the Nordic Convention, Nordic Baltic Youth in Climate Politics, starting in a bit less than 2 hours from now. Thank you.